Well, it's been an amazingly quick 5 to 6 weeks that we've been together, but I think we've covered a pretty enormous scope of ideas in such a short time. And I wanted to remind you of a couple of those things because I find it valuable just at the end of the semester to review some of the things that we've done. And even though this has only been a short time, and some of those ideas will probably be fresh in your memory, some of them may not. And I think it's worth just bringing them all together in a moment. And so that's what I wanted to do with this last lecture here, to give you a review of the things that we've talked about. And we began the course by thinking about the various documents that we produce, from photographs to videos to posts to location data. And we thought necessarily about these documents not necessarily as things that we produce out of an event, but really as being fundamentally attached to the practice of experiencing something. That documents and the experience of a live event are very much hand in hand, not necessarily about an outcome, a trajectory, that one thing being predicated on another, but instead, documents are a way that we understand the world around us. The act of documentation is very much a part of what it means to live everyday life, not simply something that produces an object in the world that helps us remember an action, but the process of documenting is itself a part of the live event. And this spanned across a couple of readings, including Josie Van Dyke's work. We read several chapters from her book, Mediated Memories, and that led into the discussions of liveness with Phil Auslanders, to think that the real-time synchronous experience of an event is not more authentic than the recording of that event or the documentation of it. And he showed us that essentially those two things are interwoven in a way that is inseparable. Mediatization and real-time live events are bound together in ways that we cannot separate. So he talked about the ways that when we go to a live event, we're often referencing documents, whether it be going to a concert of a band that you know their music extraordinarily well, and everything you hear is always in reference to a document, to what you listen to on your personal listening device, or going to musical theater and hearing a different actress singing those words, and you hear the differences in tone from the live event and the document, so they're always related in a sense. And he also talked about the cultural capital of going to a live concert. Even sitting in the nosebleed seats, capturing that YouTube video that you can't even see the artist at all, you just see lights and it's grainy. Why do we do this? For cultural capital. And that cultural capital is the value a culture gives for being at that event. And oftentimes it's not even necessarily about the event itself, about that particular event. It's about the cultural capital of simply being there. And he talks about oftentimes the mediatization actually constitutes the live event, as in things like instant replay in sports. So this, I think, is an important place to start, not separating documents and the live, or and thinking of it in terms of authentic and inauthentic, but instead of seeing them as bound together. And along these lines, we watched The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That was the first film we watched. And then we later watched that short video, I Forgot My Phone. And both of these are pointing to the fact that our memories are bound up with the objects, especially the documentary objects that we create in life, whether it be photographs or a totem, some sort of symbol that helps us remember somebody else, but also that we're understanding the world through these objects as well. That the iPhone as a camera is not simply about creating memories, but these are windows into actually understanding what it means to be in the world. Our objects are these touchstones that help us understand the world around us. They are modes of thinking. Objects are ways of thinking about the world. So I think this is an important place that we began. And then we moved into just thinking about photography and photographs, beginning with Walter Benjamin's work on the massive shift that's happened because of photographs in terms of reproduction. What happens to art when it's designed to be reproduced? like the photograph, where it's not signaled based on rarity, but is signaled based on its ability to be reproduced. This absolutely shifts the concept of something like authenticity or the aura. Where is the aura in a photograph? And ultimately, art that is designed to be reproduced points to the important fact that the aura exists, but it exists because we as a culture imbue objects with aura. Aura is not an essence of something like the Mona Lisa. The aura in the Mona Lisa exists because cultures give that painting the aura based on concepts of rarity. And with other types of media and art that aren't predicated on rarity, we give them different cultural aura. So aura is something that's flexible and very culturally specific. And we moved into looking at Sontag. So Susan Sontag's piece shifted us from looking at photographs to looking at the practice of photography. And for her, again, reiterating a lot of what Van Dyke was arguing, that photography as a practice is essentially shifting the ways that we experience the world. And that is an important aspect of thinking about what a photograph does. A photograph is about a practice of seeing. And for her, that practice is bound up with the right to view something, the ethics around what you're able to look at, and what do you have the right to observe? What's worth looking at? Photography points us to the answers for that, again, that are very culturally specific. What does viewing mean in your culture? Look at photography. Look at the practices of taking a photograph, and even thinking about your own selfies that you've been taking. What are you allowed to take pictures of? Where are you allowed to take them? Many of you have noted that holding up the phone and taking a picture of yourself in certain very public settings is a really uncomfortable scenario to be in. And I even experienced that walking around the University of Maryland campus trying to capture some selfies of myself for this class. It's extraordinarily uncomfortable at moments, and that reveals certain notions about what we have the right to take pictures of, where, and sort of the ethics bound up in certain acts of photography, especially as culturally we tend to imbue them with narcissism. Whether or not it actually is bound up with narcissism is something we've also talked about in this class. Thinking about selfies as a larger phenomenon. And we finished up that week by looking at Roland Barthes' piece, thinking about him looking for his mother, a photograph of his mother soon after she died, to get at sort of that memory of her that he was trying to engage. And for him, photographs announce history. They announce our mortality, and ultimately then announce our position in time and in our culture. And so photographs do a lot of the work that Roland Barthes and Susan Sontag, that Walter Benjamin and Susan Sontag had pointed us to earlier in the week. So then the question became, what's different? So we're taking tons of photographs. Is there anything different between the photographic modes that they're talking about, the analog photographs, and our own digital photographs that we are capturing? And ubiquity is one of the aspects. The fact that they're everywhere, that we all have these cameras in our pockets now, that we can document so much of the world around us. But the other aspect that I pointed to is that in being digital, there's something fundamentally different about the photograph. It's boiled down to code. It's not simply about paper and light and negatives. It is about it all being distilled down to digits. And digits, in that sense, encourage sharing. Because I can share a photograph with you, I keep it, you keep it, there's no difference between the two. There is no loss or degradation in the way that making a photocopy of a photograph would announce degradation. This encourages sharing. Digital media encourage sharing. We want to share the files, and we can spread them widely. So the difference in digital photography is the ways that it becomes social. And this is something that Nathan Jurgensen pointed to in his interview, that creating a digital photograph isn't about necessarily creating a document. It's about communicating. It's about sharing something with people broadly. It's an act of communication, not an act of archiving or documentation. Digital photography is doing something different when it comes to the social aspects of that. And I think that's a fascinating point to think about. And now, since we have these cameras on us at all times, it's extending an earlier phenomenon of the camera eye, of this documentary lens that we bring to the world, essentially that then extends all the way into thinking about everything as a possible Facebook post. The world around me is waiting for me to document and share, to then let people know broadly that the event, again, is very, very bound up in acts of documentation. We then moved into looking at surveillance. Now that we are sharing these documents broadly, we end up actually watching each other extensively. That we are posting our lives online for others to see, and we're watching each other. And this is a major shift that's happened in surveillance, where it used to be this top-down watching of the powerful watching the disempowered, and now what we have are you and I watching each other. We are monitoring each other. And then the question that emerges is, does that shift the dynamics and the effects of surveillance? Surveillance in the panoptic model was about discipline. It's about, I think I'm being watched, therefore I'm going to act differently. I should behave. And that's the idea of the panopticon. So what happens when we're watching each other? Does that shift the ways that we act? Especially in an era of context collapse where everything you're posting is to all audiences, not just a few audiences on your Facebook page. Does that shift the ways that you think about performing identity through a space like Facebook and through the pictures and videos that you post on a site like that, or Instagram? When everyone is watching you, how does that affect your behavior? Is it similar to the panoptic gaze that disciplines you to act culturally in a culturally appropriate way? So we then moved into thinking about the quantified self, about how we're watching ourselves, we're monitoring ourselves and producing big data about our own bodies to tell us something about ourselves. And Gary Wolf's TED Talk argued that in order to know ourselves better, we have to have the facts. We have to know as much as we can, and the quantified self movement is a part of that. But it's also an act of self-surveillance that disciplines the body and also disciplines us culturally. And so it's interesting to make those connections into how documentation is shifting to where we are monitoring so much about ourselves to perhaps learn more about ourselves, but also, again, the effects of that self-surveillance might be in line with the long history of surveillance. And this all exists within the era of big data, and I talked about the massive amounts of data that we're producing as a culture and as individuals, and what big data is doing is changing what we know as facts. Facts are changing because when it came to empirical truths that you could witness through your body, through your eyes, through your senses, big data is about the things that the body would never be able to sense. It's capturing those patterns and massive amounts of data well beyond the human sensorium to tell us certain truths. And I ended that by saying, while this may be true, we cannot discount deep data. That data that is about an individual's conversation with another individual can tell us perhaps just as much, if sometimes not more, than big data can tell us. And we ended here this course by looking at location, by thinking about mobile technology's impact on the stories we tell about a space and on our own ideas about incorporating location as a part of the document itself. That where you are often tells us much about your identity. So we talked about location tracking. We talked about also how this serves towards a model of what's called social proprioception, where knowing where people are helps you understand your own self. The limits of your body as it extends out into the world is often about the connections between your body and the people around you. And where are those people? When we did the mapping exercise, the real-time tracking exercise that we just finished with using Glimpse and Instagram and Twitter, this was fascinating to see how spread out we all were. It's an online class. It's always asynchronous. You're watching this now at a time that perhaps no other student in the class is watching it. We're all at different times, but being in real time, all visualized on a map, was fascinating to see, and it shifted my concept of what this class actually felt like. The ways that we were connecting. Spatially, we are spread out, but all connected around this one class. So it shifts the idea of social proprioception, about linking out into the world. And location and this kind of identity will be increasingly, I think, a part of the documented life. So the final things that we have for this course are you producing your reflection about the selfies that we've taken all semester long, doing your reflection paper about that, but then also taking something that you've documented and turning it into a capstone project. And this can take any shape that you want it to. And one of the things that I do want to say about this project is that the documents that you do can be documents that you've produced at any time, anywhere. It doesn't have to be within the confines even of the 6 weeks of this class. Take documents that you've created throughout history even, something that you yourself though have produced. It can't be documents necessarily that others have produced. Your own documents that you've produced at any time, and create a capstone out of this. So I'll be really fascinated to see what kinds of projects you produce, but I hope that they are meaningful for you in some way as well. Do a project, do a capstone that you think engages your interests and also expresses your relationship to the ideas that we've studied. How would you like to express the ideas that we've studied? All the stuff that I've even just gone over in this short overview, how would you like to express those as it relates to documents that perhaps hopefully you find important in your life, or even documents that you've just created for this project, to explore acts of documentation in a way that perhaps you haven't before? That's another option that I would be interested in seeing as well. So again, it's been a really fascinating class. I've learned a ton from this, especially from the conversations you've had on Twitter, and just thinking about things that I haven't explored in the past, such as taking selfies and thinking about the culture of the selfie as it's situated within this larger history, and thinking about where documentation is going in the future as well, as it's become an important part of our lives and will continue to become vital components of our identity as we move forward. So thank you for a fantastic class, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. Bye.